All right, I'm super excited. I've got Laura Boswell here with me. She's a wonderful artist, and yeah, I'm so thankful that you come on the show. Laura is a printmaker working with Linocut, woodblock, and traditional Japanese woodblock printing. She has a degree in art history, visual art from the University of Wales, Aberystwyth. I don't know if I
Yeah.
pronounce it. Yes, and she is elected to the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers. She has attended 3 printmaking residency in Japan, studying woodblock printmaking with master craftsmen, and her book, Making Japanese Woodblock Prints, from the Crowood Press, was published in 2019. And she also has a second book with Crowood Linocut and Reduction Printing, Design and Techniques, which came out in early 2022. In addition to that, she also runs a YouTube channel as Laura Boswell Printmaker, devoted to sharing her printmaking skills, which is awesome. I urge everybody to go and have a look. And teaching is an important part of her practice. And so she teaches classes in both woodblock and linocut techniques. And just to finish off this wonderful introduction, what an amazing background. Her prints feature national collections, including the Buckinghamshire County Museum, the House of Lords, and the National Library of Wales. And she also has prints in the Nagasawa Art Park collection and the MI Lab print collection in Japan. So it's a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to have you, Laura.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. So, Laura, with this amazing background, like I just would love to start with what has brought you to creating your Linocut prints. Like, how did it start for you?
Well, I would love to tell you that I've always had a plan and that I've had a sort of smooth career, but that's not in fact true because I studied at art school and then I left and I went into the photographic industry. So I am a second career artist. Kind of the day I left college was the day that I stopped drawing or printmaking or making art as such. And I didn't go back to that for, I guess, about 16 or 17 years, which is a long, long break. And then I went back because I was kind of pushed into it by family friends. So I didn't have a plan to go back to making art, let alone becoming a professional artist. But I had some family friends who owned a printing press that was in pieces, and they'd had it for a long time, and they decided that it would be good if I went back to printmaking. This was cooked up by my husband's parents as well. And for about a year they encouraged me to take this press on and to start printmaking again. And I kept saying no because I don't know if this resonates with your audience, but if you've gone for a long time without being creative, it can be quite frightening, the thought of going back and making art again. So I was very cautious about it and I said no, but they persisted and more or less dumped the press on the doorstep. So I did start printmaking again. And once I'd started and I'd made my first couple of prints, then it became easier. And I started going back to printmaking and fell in love with it all over again. And from there, I had lots of part-time jobs, and now it's my full-time occupation. And I guess I've been working full-time as an artist for the last maybe decade or so. So it's been an interesting career I've had.
Yeah.
Certainly not a well-planned one, I don't think.
Well, it's amazing that you've had the people around you to almost like really see that talent or that, creativity within you and be like, let it out and do.
Yes, it's indeed, and I think that's something that I needed. I needed that push. I would never have done it on my own. I'd really completely lost confidence and just needed that kind of kick to get my self confidence back to make some prints.
Yeah, yeah. I guess like what were the thoughts that you were having before, or you declined as well quite a few times. You shared about, no, I'm not going to do that. So what was going on for you to not want to do that, or to, yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I think that what I felt was that if I was going to go back to making art, it was a very big deal. It was very serious. I didn't want to just go back to sort of pottering around doing the odd bit of art as a hobby. And certainly when I wasn't making art and I had another job, I would almost cross the road to avoid art shops because it was always nagging at me, the fact that I had given up and I'd stopped. So I wasn't comfortable with that. And then I think that when they said you should go back to making art, there seemed to be an awful lot on the line. So at least I was taking it terribly seriously. So when I did finally agree, it was kind of all in. Once I'd said yes and I'd started printing again, then I really felt like I had to give it my all. It was sort of surprisingly serious business.
Wow, and it worked out.
Well, thank goodness it did. I didn't really have a plan B on that. But yes, from the moment I started again, it was with that vision that it was going to be a big and serious part of my life. I was not in it for just a sort of adding to another hobby, if you like.
But that's amazing. I guess that energy that you really like, that decision and that focus that you put in has obviously paid off, and almost like not having a plan B, they say that's almost better as well, to actually not, then you are going to make it happen. So it felt like you really connected with and so I'm curious, what was it that kind of made you stop creating when you came out of your studies or university, was it? And you said you didn't do printmaking or draw since then for 17 years?
Yeah, it was a difficult one because I did a sort of rather odd degree. I did do this joint honours in visual art and art history at Aberystwyth University, but the reason I ended up there was that my father absolutely would not support me going to art school. He considered that to be an utter waste of time. And I know there are a lot of parents out there who are very worried by the thought of their child going into the arts. And so he wouldn't support art school. So I found the only course in the country that did a combined degree on the art side with librarianship. Which was kind of a tick box for Dad, because in those days librarian was sort of a steady job. I mean, maybe not now, but then. So that was in the 80s. And then after I'd been at university for a year, I dropped the librarianship and just did the art, which was a bit sneaky, but it had the desired effect. But I think when I left university, I just didn't have any confidence that I could survive financially as an artist. I think he'd managed to persuade me that much was true. And so I wanted a job, a steady job. And I think once I'd done that, I then felt I couldn't do the art. The other thing was that I specialised in printmaking and I had no access to a printmaking studio. So that was tricky. So I think it was a combination of sort of a lack of my own confidence, but also my father dinning into me that it was no way to make money and it was not a career. Probably did for me going straight into an arts career. And then having made that decision, I didn't want anything to do with it. If I couldn't do it all the time, you know, it was just, I didn't want to dabble.
Yes, no, I understand. And it's crazy how we think like how impactful actually our parents are, or things that we hear, and how we then make our decisions based on that. And you're not the first person I hear who's done their studies doing something slightly different that's close enough to being, you know, still a little bit creative, but slightly different, but then turning out to not be quite so much one's own truth. And obviously that comes from the older generation as well, you know, where art as a career was still seen as not something that brings food on the table or something like that.
Absolutely. I see it a lot in people that I teach, and sometimes it's as simple as an art teacher at school telling them that they can't draw or they can't, you know, they're not good, and then I'll be teaching them as successful adults later in life, and they still have this big hurdle about the fact that somebody has said to them that they can't draw or whatever. And, you know, I feel very empathetic towards students who feel like that, because I know how you see that as a truth, and you have to overcome that to move on.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It really creates so many changes in somebody's life just by having a teacher say something like that, or like I know from somebody, and including myself, having teachers as well telling you something. I was told not to apply to that university that I wanted to apply to, for example. But I didn't listen, and it worked out. But
oh, that's fantastic. No, that's as it should be. That's
yeah, but
very
to
good.
other people, like, it can divert off the personal track. But yeah, so you are teaching as well. So how did you start the teaching journey that you're on?
Well, that was quite interesting, because I had no plans to teach, and I'd gone back to making prints, and I'd had a few open studios and things like that. But the big teaching thing came when I went to Japan, because the residency that I did, which was in 2009, and that was at the Nagasawa Art Park. In those days, it's now known as MI Lab, and it was a very generous residency, and the aim of it was to both teach Westerners Japanese woodblock printing, but also to encourage Western artists to share what they'd learned, either by teaching or by talks and so forth. So we were very much encouraged to teach, and we were taught in an extremely careful and clear way while we were on the residency in Japan. We were taught the technique. So when I came back from that, I felt that I had something to share. And also at the time, this method of printing wood blocks with water-based pigment, using brushes instead of rollers, that was it wasn't unknown in the UK, but it was rare. So it gave me something that I could go to higher education and art colleges and say, you know, I could teach this. And what I ended up doing was teaching adult learners through various private art schools to begin with, and that was really good. It was a nice introduction to teaching, very helpful.
Wonderful. And there's something so nice to pass on, something that yeah, to teach others, to pass on something new to them. And obviously it's been it was a unique thing as well in the UK, right?
Yeah, it was quite rare, I think, to teach that.
Amazing.
And the other thing about it was that it was a good introduction to teaching, because it's quite a structure. Japanese woodblock is a lot of sort of small processes that hang together to create a finished print. So in terms of teaching, it was very structured. These days, my teaching is much more kind of free flow and sort of adapting to what the student wants to do. But when I first started, it was nice to start with something where I had a very clear progression to lead people through.
Yeah. What's your favorite thing about printmaking or Linocut for you?
That is a really good question. I think there are a couple of sort of key things. That I love the drawing phase of designing the print. So when I do a print, I'll go out and I'll do some sketches and take photographs. But there's a moment in my studio where I'm cooking up the image. So I'll be working from those sketches, from those photos, and combining them to create my vision of that landscape, whatever it is that's hooked me in the landscape. And there's a sort of fierce joy about getting that drawing down on paper. I find that kind of a very energetic process, full of hope, because you're at the beginning of starting your print and it's all going to be fantastic. So there's that moment, and I really love that. And then I do like it when I have something really complicated to cut out of lino, and I can kind of hunker down with a podcast, and I know that for the next 4 hours or whatever, all I'm going to be doing is that precise cutting, and I'm absolutely at one with that, and time just goes. So those are kind of the two favorite moments, I think, for me.
Yeah, it feels like the moment where you're in flow, where you've got that energy of creativity. Fantastic. And So what do you get inspired by? I mean, we'd had a little chat before, and obviously, you know, you do wonderful landscapes, but so tell me more a little bit about your, I guess, inspiration process.
Well, I think the thing that interests me and has always interested me, when I was a student, I worked a lot with architecture because I was either living in London or I was living in this Welsh village. So I was a Welsh town, I should say. And so I was working very much with what was around me, which in those days was architecture. When I went back to printmaking, I gravitated again to what was around me, which was rural landscape. But I very quickly realized that what really interested me was landscape without the effect of man, so wild landscapes. And I think I love light and sort of changes of season and things like that. But over the years, it's really come down to ideas about space and scale. So I like the idea of distance, and I also quite like dramatic landscapes. So I've just moved up to the south of Scotland because I was working more and more with northern landscapes, and I was based in the home counties in England, which is really pretty, but it's a very kind of man-made landscape. And I've realised over time that what I want to do is give the viewer something that's completely empty of man for them to kind of have themselves these kind of wild landscapes. And where I am now, which is Kirkcudbright, which is in Dumfries and Galloway, it has the most amazing coastline, and that's doing all the things for me that I love. It's got the drama, and it's got these very dizzying cliffs and this wonderful light, very luminous light up here. So I think when I go out looking for what I want in a landscape, it's really that drama and that sense of light and scale that I'm after.
Yeah, yes. You obviously have that in abundance now where you are. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, my son always says that I like landscapes where you might die if you slip, which is a bit of a sort of macabre way of putting it, but he does have a point. I like those cliffs. Yes,
yes, wonderful, wonderful. So in terms of like when that moment when you just trusted it and you said, I'm going to be doing this, and you gave it your all, like, I guess my question is, some people that might listen as well might, you know, be on the fence about, am I going to go and do this? Am I going to use my art and create something with it? Like, am I going to do the jump or you know, try it, but are on the fence and perhaps over and over hold back? I guess my question is to you is like, what might help them, or what has helped you in that moment to do that leap of faith?
right. Well, what I did, which I found really useful, was that I set a target. I joined up with my local Open Studio Association. So in the UK, certainly, we have I think it's pretty countrywide. People have open studio events. So maybe a county or an area will have a week or a weekend where people can open their own studios and show their art to visiting public. And I was very lucky in Buckinghamshire that we did have a strong open studio. So I signed up to that, which meant that at a fixed date, I had to have some art on the walls for people who weren't family, who weren't invested in being kind to me, would come in and see. And in terms of finances, the way that I did it was I did lots of part-time jobs. I did all sorts of bits and pieces. I worked as a receptionist. I was a credit controller. I worked as a butcher for a bit. I did all sorts of bits and pieces. And I worked around that. So I certainly didn't think like day one, I'm going to make all my money being an artist. I did accept that might entail having to do other work. And I was lucky to be. My husband at the time was earning money at the time. Now we work together. We run me as an artist together as a business. But at the time, he also worked in the photographic industry, which is where we met. So we had his income as well, which was very good. So he supported me in those early days. But I certainly did lots of other jobs and bits and pieces at the same time.
Yeah, fantastic. What do you feel is that the most important ingredient for you in, or that you find in running your own business through your creativity?
Stamina. I think you need phenomenal stamina to run a business as an artist, because so little of it is actually the joy of making the work. There's an awful lot of administration. Every artist I talk to who makes a living from it reckons they get, it varies, but usually about 40%, maybe 35–40% of the time is making the art, and the rest of the time is doing a million other picky little jobs that come along with the territory. So there's the fun stuff like social media, which I really enjoy. And then there's a lot of tedious paperwork and admin and stuff like that. So I think you need a lot of stamina. There's also a lot of rejection. There's a lot of disappointment. It's all a bit of a gamble. And you need to keep going through all of that. So you absolutely have to want to do it, I think.
Yeah.
Which sounds very negative. I don't mean it to be. It's just that's kind of the reality of the situation, I think.
Yeah, it's like looking at it with the mindset of all the aspects that actually, you know, one has to address and deal with when actually making a business out of your creativity, out of your art. So it's not just the fun part and the painting and then forgetting about everything else.
Absolutely. Well, annoyingly, it's kind of all the skills that my father would have admired. You know, it's sort of, I mean, he's gone now, but up until the day he died, he was very happy to acknowledge that I had a greetings card business, because I sell greetings cards of my work. So he'd like ask me about how the greetings cards were selling, because that was like a business thing.
Yes.
So it was quite funny, but in a way, he was right in some respects. You do need that kind of organized admin side as well as the creativity.
That actually brings me to a thought I had earlier about the 17 years that you weren't creating art or doing, like, what have they actually, how have they benefited you in your business now?
Well, I think I was very lucky in the path that I chose, because I worked back in the day, I worked in stock libraries. So these were photographic libraries. So I did sort of end up as a librarian, where I would be managing the photographs of professional photographers and licensing their use in magazines and books and things like that. So I cut my teeth in a news agency, and that was a bit of a baptism of fire, because it was a lot of news, a lot of tabloid news, things like that. So we were dealing with a lot of paparazzi work and things, royals and sort of dramas. And then I ended up running a stock library with my father-in-law, and I was running a department that was all about child development, which was great, because I was expecting my son at the time, so I had a baby, and I was looking after, I had about 16 photographers, and we covered everything from childbirth right through to teenage years. And so I looked after their pictures, I edited them and dealt with the administration. And we made my son was the stunt baby. So whenever we had to do anything that was dodgy, like climbing on ovens or looking like you were drinking bleach, it was my son was always roped in as the model for that. But it was very admin heavy, and you had to be very careful, because obviously these were very sensitive photographs, and so you had to be very sure about how they were going to be shown and who was publishing them and things like that. So it taught me to be very pernickety about paperwork and stuff like that, but also it was very good visually, because I would put together selections of photographs for clients, and it taught you to look for strong compositions, what would look good on the page. And the other thing, which is a funny thing, but it's a sort of small detail, it taught me that the person who makes the image isn't always the best person to choose the image. And I think in my life as an artist, when I work with galleries or I work with publishers or something like that, then I understand that there are times when it's better to defer to them and let them use their expertise, hanging a show or something like that, because often as the creator, you're very close to the work and you judge it on a very different criteria from another viewer. So that's a sort of small thing, but that's been very helpful, I think.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, so it just comes full circle in the end. It's like things, you know, happen for a reason as well. So all of that, you know, seems like amazing things to have learned and experienced. So wonderful.
Certainly very, very useful. Yeah, I mean, I sort of regret the years I didn't make art, but I don't regret the career and then going into an artist, because I think that gave me such an advantage when it came to running a business. That was incredibly helpful.
Yeah. That thing that you shared earlier about you didn't feel like you wanted to do just a little bit of art and then you did nothing. Like what was that feeling? Like why, I guess what might have been the reason of why you didn't want to make just a little bit?
I think because it was so important to me at the time. Well, it still is. I thought if I carried on doing it as a sort of, I don't know, in the evenings or at the weekend or something like that, it just felt really like it wouldn't be good. I can't really explain where I got this idea from, because you would think if you love something, you do it at any, you know, in any way. But it was almost easier to just walk away from it. It was very sort of all or nothing. And I guess I just couldn't see it going anywhere. And so I thought better not to do it at all than to just like have that taste of it and not be able to do it properly. I think it's interesting looking back on it that because if somebody said that to me now, I'd say, well, there's a myriad of things that you could do, like taking courses, or you could join a studio, or you could do all this sort of thing. But then it just felt like there was nothing that I could do. And so I just dropped it completely. But I felt terrible about it, which is why that's why I was crossing the road to avoid art shops.
Right, yes. I guess maybe there's a part of you knowing that you can do it the full way, and then it might feel even more frustrating to do a little bit and no, it's not at the
I think that's
thing.
yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have found that very frustrating. And also I think there was always that kind of wanting it to be the best it could possibly be. And I was lucky at university because in the visual art degree I did, you could specialize in your final year in a particular discipline, and I was the only person who chose to do printmaking in that final year. So I kind of had the studio, there were other printmakers in the studio, but I had a lot of kit to myself in the studio, and I was tutored by the head of department who was a printmaker, and it was just such a focused year that coming out of that, I thought anything else is just not going to be as good. You know, it's not going to be like it was when I was there 24/7 working on prints. So yeah, it was a bit of a dramatic flounce out of making art, I think. But I was quite young. I have to say, I was only like 22 at the time. So dramatic gestures come easy at that age. Yeah.
And I guess may have been like a suppression of your creativity, right? In some way. Do you feel that it kind of trickled into other areas of your life, that feeling of
well, interestingly, it did. I mean, I didn't do any drawing, but what I did do was to sew. I've always sewn. My mother was a professional seamstress, and so I grew up with sewing. And so I went into making quilts, and I made like American style picture quilts rather than patchwork. So they were applique images. And so I was designing those, and when I went back to printmaking, my prints started off as kind of they were landscapes, but they looked like quilts. Like the sky would be a backing cloth that went below the landscape as well as above it, and the whole lot was anchored to the sky. And so, kind of quilt making was interesting because it gave me a way into printmaking that was a new language to deal with rural landscape, because before I'd been doing architectural work, and so I had no vocabulary when I went back to printmaking for the landscape I was in, which wasn't urban any longer. So the quilting that I'd done, as I say, my early prints look very like they could be quilts, they could be appliqued.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Really cool. And you wrote 2 books, right? So
I did, yeah.
how was the process of creating those books for you?
Again, that was interesting. I like writing. I've always enjoyed writing. So actually writing the books the writing bit wasn't so difficult, although obviously you have to be careful, because if you're telling people to do things, you kind of have to know what you're doing. So that does take a bit of checking and stuff. So the actual writing of them was easy. But again, there is a lot of admin that comes with it. So there's the getting everything in the right order. There's thinking how the book will flow. There's working out what level of explanation is needed. I think if you do something all the time and you kind of know it really well, you have to take that step right back and think, well, I know nothing. What does she mean when she says cut this? So you have to think about that level of engagement. And of course, there's the photography element of it. And I'm lucky in that my husband is a professional photographer. So we did that between ourselves. But again, that's a whole schedule of getting the right images shot in the right way and making sure the captions match them, and that you haven't got 2 of the same picture and you're missing another one. And so the sort of faffing was quite a big bit of it, but the writing is always a pleasure. I like that very much.
Yes. Did your teaching perhaps like help as well, like how you portrayed the books in some way?
Oh, I doubt I could have written them without the teaching, actually, because students are a sort of huge resource. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I love about teaching as an artist, is that having students there to ask questions and to need to learn makes you verbalize what you're doing and why, and makes you put teaching things into a logical order. And so when I came to write the books, I kind of already knew the order that things should flow in to make it clear to the audience how to do things, but also the kind of concerns people have and the reasons for doing things. Like in the Linocut book, I had a whole section on how to kind of pull your ideas out of your head and get them onto a piece of paper, and things you should think about when you're drawing for print that you wouldn't think about if you were just doing a drawing to be an end result in itself. And certainly without the years of having students to help me with that, I would have found it very, very hard to write the books in the way that I did.
Yes. In the process of teaching, what have you learned? What's I guess, if you're looking at it now, what would be one thing that you feel like you've learned from teaching and from dealing with artists learning from you?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned from it, in a way, is how much I have to learn, which sounds a bit cheesy, but every time I teach people, and certainly I often teach people who've never never made a print before, I always learn something in return. And however much I may think that I know stuff, they always throw something up. There's always an idea, or there's an approach, or there's a, why can't I do this, or what if I do that? And that's fantastic. And the other thing about it is to see why people print make, because people come to the classes and they, on the surface, they come to learn about printmaking, but there's like a million different reasons why people want to make art, and also what the purpose of the art they make is. And I find that very, it's just very helpful to realize the kind of sheer breadth of that, and to be kind of respectful of that. I mean, the sort of story I would tell against myself, for example, is I had a lady in one class and she was learning, and she asked me to repeat a lot of things and to do demonstrations, and she was apologizing for not having quite got the message. And she was really quite elderly. She was in her 80s, and I said at one point, oh, well, you know, please don't worry, it's absolutely fine, I don't mind repeating things. It can be a bit tiring, all this learning, you know, kind of not meaning to be patronizing, but probably patronizing way. And she said, oh, well, the problem is that last week I sat the finals for my doctorate, and so I've been working really hard recently. So I was assuming she hadn't sort of been in a learning situation, and she'd just done her doctorate. And I thought that was a real learning moment for me, not to make any assumptions. And I do like that about teaching. That's great. Keeps me on my toes, certainly.
Yeah, amazing. No, definitely. I'm sure like it teaches you a lot with the interaction of the people attending. Awesome. And you mentioned like about the purpose of their art. Like, what do you feel is the purpose of your art?
I think for me, it's like sort of getting it out of my system. So there's like, it's always, once I've done a print, I'm on to the next one, or usually while I'm making the print, I'm on to the next one. So I'm sort of very driven to create. But what I want for the viewer is to give them a kind of a blank canvas, if you like, to put their own stories on. And because I work with landscape, it's interesting to watch people, because they kind of engage with the prints more as a way of remembering or experiencing their own experiences, rather than me imposing a view. Because my prints are, you couldn't really hold the print up against the landscape and say that's absolutely that place, because I've moved things about and changed things. But I do get people who will look at my work and think that's a walk I've done, that's weather I remember, that's the light that I know. And so I think that the kind of, what I want for the viewer is for them to engage with it very much on their terms and weave their story into it. And it's interesting how people, they make my prints what they want. I did a print of a place on the Isle of Wight, and it's a very famous view. And because I wanted something interesting in the foreground, I cut a chalk path into the hills in the foreground, because it made the print work visually much better. And I was at an exhibition, and a lady came up to me who said that, oh, well, I live on the Isle of Wight and I know this so well, and it's lovely you've put the path in, because I did a sponsored walk there. And I'm thinking, well, it's not there, you know, I made this path up. I mean, of course I said, oh, how lovely, but it was just like, she had literally decided that was something she knew. And that's kind of what I love, and that quite often happens. I have had people in America who have bought work because it chimes with them, you know, the views they know in America, but they know it's the UK, but they kind of can relate to the landscape.
That's beautiful. It's like it really connects with people's own perhaps beautiful memories of theirs. It's like a nice feeling, or like the path that they've been into. I love that.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I want. It's once I've made the print, it's just for the viewer. It's not for me, it's for them. You know, I'm kind of on to the next thing then.
Yes. Wow. Amazing. So I guess like one of the last questions before we finish today is like, if you were to now look back on your life, and now sharing some wisdom with people listening right now, what would be one thing that you feel now that you've learned from, walking your path that is really dear to you, something that really clicked with you, that you feel like, oh, that's a message or that I would like to share, or an advice or wisdom?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think actually the best thing that I learned was a really sound bit of advice from a fellow printmaker. And it was just at the stage where I'd started printing again and I was making prints and I was starting to have open studios and things like that. And I was talking to him about what I was doing. And he said to me, stop describing yourself in the way that you do. If you talk like a woman who has a shed at the bottom of the garden, nobody will ever take you seriously. If you talk like an artist with a studio, then you'll do all right. It's not to do with the art you make, it's to do with how you believe in yourself and how you present yourself. And I think that's a really, really sound piece of advice, because my natural sort of way of being is I'm quite introverted and I'm sort of would not very confident. And I've learned over the years that you have to get over that. You really do. And that it's not fair to expect people to be confident in you and your work if you're not confident. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else is going to. So you have to kind of I'm okay now, but it was several years of kind of faking it until I got there. So yeah, I think that bit of wisdom is, even if it's a corner of your kitchen table in between the kids having tea and you doing something else, that's your studio and you're an artist. And I think you have to go from there. So that's kind of the gem I would pass on.
I love that. No, that's it, and there's this energy difference behind that. Either,
Yeah, totally.
This energy of, standing on your feet, like really confident with that, or saying, yeah, I'm an artist, but I'm doing it next to my kitchen table or something like this, and down talking yourself. Yeah. And that the energy kind of like, it's gone. That's great.
Totally.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
And your projects, anything you would like that's coming up, or something you would want to share with the listeners right now?
Oh, well, I am this February, I have a couple of exhibitions coming up, one in Edinburgh at Birch Tree Gallery, and I also am part of Lino Print 3, which is a big event in Bristol. So they're coming up, but I'm now in a happy position that I'm in Kirkcudbright and I have a gallery space as well as a studio. So I'm kind of open to visitors if anybody comes up to Kirkcudbright. And you can check out all these details and things. They're on my website, which is just lauraboswell.co.uk, or I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Laura Boswell Printmaker. So that all the details are there, and it would be lovely to see some of your listeners. So fingers crossed.
Go along, and all the details, like your website and socials, is all underneath this podcast as well, so people can.
Fantastic, thank you.
Wow, fantastic! Thank you so much. It really was a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, it was great. I had a lovely time. Thank you. That was really enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess, yeah, I'll say goodbye. And yeah, everybody, thank you so much for listening, and see you in the next one.